When you're preparing for board director interviews, it's unlike any other interview that you've probably ever gone for in the past. And typically, the board will set up a recruitment panel, which might include a couple of board members, maybe someone from the senior executive team, or an independent individual, maybe an executive search firm consultant. You typically only get one shot at this, so you only get one interview typically. So it's unlike other job interviews where you might get several opportunities to meet and greet and discuss. Board interview processes tend to be very limited, which has a lot of drawbacks for both sides in my equation. So I really do believe they should rethink the whole process, but that's a story for another day. This is the reality. Typically, they give you maybe 30 to 40 minutes on the telephone or on a video call, or potentially you do meet in person. And it can be a very relaxed conversation. And the challenge you have is that when you have these very informal or relaxed conversations, you've still got to land on your key messages and get that value proposition across to the board. Because it is so relaxed, it's also quite challenging to ask the hard questions that you want to ask. So the hard questions might be, where is the strategy at, and how's the business tracking, and what's keeping the board awake at night. You often don't get to even get to those conversations in the first round. And you're not even going to get, through to a due diligence process. So initially, you've just got to really anchor your preparation around the key messages that you want to get across, the value proposition, and the value proposition has to use some educated guesses about how that's going to help the business going forward. So when you put your value proposition on the table, and in my case it might be I've got expert HR skills, I've done a lot of work with volunteer workforces, that's very relevant to you, board ABC, because you have a very large volunteer workforce and you have a declining workforce, and you're going to want to attract new volunteers in the year ahead. That is an area of expertise that I have, that I bring to the board, and I would be able to add enormous value to the board where that's concerned. So you've got to put the value proposition on the table. So you might have a specialist skill set, but you've got to draw the reference, you've got to join the dots as to why that is relevant to that particular board, and you've got to make some educated guesses as to where they might be having some concerns or might be very interested in your experience. And you can't do this on the fly, so you've got to have done your due diligence, you've got to have looked at all the different board members, you've got to see where there are potential gaps in the boardroom, and you've got to highlight. Sometimes you've got to be prepared to go out on the front foot and tell them a few things you've noticed that aren't quite right. They may not like it, and you may not in the end get the job, but sometimes you've got to be more forthright in these processes to capture their attention and to really demonstrate that you've gone the extra mile to do your research, your due diligence, and that you're taking this appointment very, very seriously. And so, there's a whole lot of work that has to happen to pull off that initial first interview to take you through to the final round, which is where you would do your final due diligence and potentially ask a lot more questions. But we are finding that that initial conversation can be very informal, and so that's why it's very important you actually do a lot of preparation work so that you can get that key information across and make a lasting impression that separates you from other candidates that they might be considering.